The event today about irrigation development and agricultural water management in Africa, transitioning implementation for sustainable adaptation. Actually, we are delighted at the African Union to, together with the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO RAF, World Bank Group, and International Water Management Institute, organize this webinar today. We are pleased to sit here with quite number of participants. I had there's many registrations and now there's many participants around, and will update you accordingly in this event, which is showing the common interest in irrigation and agricultural water management on our beloved Africa. I am delighted to announce that today we have with us Her Excellency Ambassador Josefa Sako, Commissioner of Rural Economy and Agriculture of the African Union. We do have Dr. Abibi, and he will join us soon, the Assistant Director General and the FAO Regional Representative for Africa. We do have Dr. Mark Londell, Regional Director of Sustainable Development, East and Southern Africa at the World Bank. And we do have Dr. Mark Smith, Director General of International Water Management Institutes. Dear family members on irrigation system, the representatives of various organizations will deliver their remarks and statement in the opening session. Then we will have the second session where we have excellent speakers in the area of irrigation development and water management, and will be moderated by Dr. Petra and Dr. Mori as well. Dear participants, I think that all of you are sharing with me the interest of listening to the representatives of the various institutions. Actually, despite the busy agenda of Her Excellency Commissioner, who insisted to be with us today for the importance of this event, and I have to thank Her Excellency for that, and call her as the first speaker to allow her to join other meetings. Her Excellency Ambassador Josefa Sako, Commissioner of Rural Economy and Agriculture of the African Union, came with her solid vision of the crucial role of agriculture in sustainable development and the importance of achieving Agenda 2063 and the Malabo commitments as well. Her Excellency has extensive experiences at national, regional, continental, and international levels as well. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Welcome, Excellency.
Thank you, Dr. Hamed. Good afternoon from Addis. Good morning, depending where you are. My dear brother, Dr. Abebe Gabriel, I don't know if he's already connected, Assistant Director General and FAO Regional Representative for Africa, Dr. Mark Lundell, Regional Director of Sustainable Development, East and Southern African World Bank, Dr. Mark Smith, Director General, International Water Management Institute, distinguished participants from the REX and the member states, participants from civil society and experts, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly observed. I extend a warm greeting to you all from His Excellency Musa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. I am equally delighted that you are able to create time to participate in this important webinar organized by African Union Commission in collaboration with FAO, International Water Management Institute, and the World Bank to promote member states' internalization of the African Union irrigation development and agricultural water management framework despite the COVID-19 pandemic, which is ravaging the world and disrupting our lifestyle. I enjoin all you to continue to stay safe by keeping all the safety precautions until a vaccine is developed and life can return to normal. The vaccine is foods. Tomorrow will be World Food Day. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, realizing the role of irrigation development and practices as a catalyst for economic and rural development, the African Union, through a number of economic and rural through a number of sorry, I was realizing, take a picture, take a picture, please. Yeah. Realizing the role of irrigation development and practices has a catalyst for economic and rural development, the African Union Commission, through a number of decisions and declarations made by the head of state and government, has always prioritized water resources management and irrigation at the continental level. This includes the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, CADEP, adopted in 2003, that made sustainable land management and a reliable water control system the first pillar for the development of agriculture sector in Africa. The CIRT declaration of 2004 that recommended the strengthening of centers of excellence and or network in their establishments where they do not exist for water management. In addition, the CIRT declaration supported the African Ministerial Council on Water, in its role of preparing plans and policy related to water resource management. The Abuja Summit on Food Security in Africa, held in Nigeria in 2006, that emphasized the promotion of public sector investment in agriculture-related infrastructure, including water and irrigation. The head of state and government commitment for accelerating the achievement of water and sanitation goals in Africa during their 11th ordinary session in 2008 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. The Malabo Declaration of 2014 that re-emphasized efficient and effective irrigation-based water use and management system as one of the main strategies to end hunger in Africa by 2025. And the African Union Agenda 2063 and its 10 years action plan of moving towards the Africa we want that highlighted irrigation as the key to achieving modern agriculture for increased production and productivity and value addition. These decisions and declarations are key to achieving the #1 aspiration of Agenda 2063, entitled A Prosperous Africa, based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. The African Union Commission, in collaboration with its partner, released the inaugural biannual review report on the implementation of 2014 Malabo Declaration in February 2020, which provided a clear idea on the current situation of irrigation in Africa, which is not very encouraging. So we need to make a lot of progress. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, irrigation, no doubt, is an urgent imperative and an indispensable pillar for attaining the zero hunger vision by 2025, as stated in the Malabo Declaration of 2014. Goal #2 of the Sustainable Development Goal and the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, doubling agricultural productivity and eliminating hunger and malnutrition in Africa by 2020, will not be a marriage unless irrigation development and agriculture water management are accorded top priority. Today with the climate change, we have climate variability, so we really need to focus and implement the irrigation program in our continent if we want to feed our population and if we want to reduce hunger by 2025. African Union SAFGRAD has the specialized technical office of the African Union working in the area of agricultural research and development in semi-arid zone, took the lead in initiating the framework for irrigation development and agricultural water management in Africa. The framework, which was endorsed by the Specialized Technical Committee on Agriculture, Rural Development, Water and Environment in 2019, last year in October, and the Executive Council of the African Union in February 2020, this year during the summit, is structured around 4 strategic African water management area or agricultural water developmental pathway are included. AWM in rain-fed farming, farmer-led irrigation, scheme development and modernization, and wastewater recovery and reuse. The cross-cutting issues address themes and actionable areas that should be emphasized and supported to reap the benefits of AWM, as well as to promote its expansion and sustainability. The framework calls for a broad view of opportunities while considering national peculiarity and the need to address a parallel pathway to accelerate adoption of water and climate-wise AWM methods. The challenge for national policymakers is to use institutional reform to facilitate and enable the process that supports farmers-led irrigation development, technology, financial and agro-market access, and ensure land and water tenure, particularly for private sector and community partnership. Distinguished participants, I wish to express my appreciation to African Union SAFGRAD team for taking the initiative to develop this blueprint. It is my pleasure to recommend the framework to all agricultural actors and planners at national, regional, and continental level of development. It is hoped that the framework will inspire and galvanize interests at scale in irrigation development and agricultural water management as we advance agricultural transformation through resources intensification on the continent. To achieve impact, I am kindly requesting the development partners to mobilize financial and technical resources to support AU SAFGRAD to coordinate the implementation of this framework. To conclude, allow me on behalf of the African Union Commission to thank the development partners who co-organized this webinar with us, in particular FAO, IWMI, and the World Bank, as well as the key speakers who will share their experience with us. Je vous remercie pour votre attention. Thank you very much. Shukran.
Thank you, Excellency Commissioner, for joining us. And actually, on behalf of 222 participants, I have to thank you for giving us your time and wish you a good day. Merci beaucoup, Excellence. Dear colleagues, my family members in irrigation sector, all of you know that International Water Management Institute works with innovative water solutions for sustainable development, and they have developed their 2019-2023 strategy to achieve that through their offices in 13 countries and a global network of scientists operating in more than 30 countries. Therefore, I'd like to call Dr. Mark Smith, Director General of the International Water Management Institute. By the way, Dr. Smith, allow me to congratulate you for this position. Congratulations. On behalf of all participants, I'm congratulating you, Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith has a good experience in Asia, Africa, and Latin America as well. Dr. Smith, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. El Makas, also for your congratulations. Very much appreciated. Excellency, Ambassador Josephat Sako, Commissioner of Rural Economy and Agriculture of the African Union, Dr. Ababe Haile Gabriel, Assistant Director General and FAO Regional Representative for Africa, Dr. Mark Lundell, World Bank Regional Director for Sustainable Development, East and Southern Africa, distinguished participants from rural economic communities, regional economic communities, and member states, participants from civil society and experts, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me thank you to our co-conveners for this webinar, the African Union, FAO, and World Bank. We at IMI are privileged to join you in organizing today's event and contributing to this critical dialogue on the agenda of irrigation development and improved agricultural water management in Africa. And on behalf of all my IMI colleagues, welcome to all participants. To begin, my congratulations to the African Union on the launch in May of this year of the Framework for Irrigation Development and Agricultural Water Management in Africa. This is a landmark, action-oriented strategy for ensuring that irrigation and sustainable water resources development in agriculture play their expected role in the achievement of the ambitions for inclusive growth and prosperity that are laid out in the Malabo Declaration and the African Union Agenda 2063. The opportunities from this are clear: using water and water innovation on farms to catalyze agricultural intensification and overcome low agricultural productivity, to build resilience to the changes in climate that are being experienced by farmers across Africa, and to help make sure that the growing population of the continent will prosper while it enjoys food security. The disruptions to agriculture and food systems caused by COVID-19 only brings these needs into sharper relief, while also highlighting the opportunities before us now to use recovery from the pandemic to not just build back better, but to transform water systems while we do so. At IMI, we're committed to this agenda, to working through partnerships, to use our research for development capabilities, to spur innovation and action on the 4 development pathways set out in the framework. We're working extensively now on farmer-led irrigation, for example, with the African Development Bank's TAT program in USAID's Innovation Lab for Small-Scale Irrigation. Our research is supporting the private sector to catalyze the needed investment, as well as the potential for solar technologies to power irrigation development and overcome sustainability challenges. Our programs are also working with farmers, entrepreneurs, local government, and national authorities on innovation and scaling of wastewater recycling and water reuse for irrigation. We, like many, see enormous potential for digital innovation to help achieve radical improvements in the efficiency of water use in agriculture, whether irrigated or rain-fed. IMI's Water Secure Africa project, for example, is working across Africa to bridge the technological divide that exists between the enormous wealth of available remote sensing data and the practical tools that are needed by farmers to help them produce more food, more efficiently, and with less risk. IMI has been working in Africa on these issues for over 30 years, and we will continue to do so under our IMI 2019 to 2023 strategy and through the 4 regional offices that we have situated across the continent. We will also put this work at the center of what we as IMI take into One CGIAR. One CGIAR is an initiative that will bring together the collective strengths of all the CGIAR centers and our partners to galvanize science and innovation to transform food, land, and water systems, to meet the mega challenges that the globe is facing, the world is facing, and Africa is facing. The mega challenges of food and nutrition security, equality and inclusion, climate change, biodiversity loss, and development that takes place within environmental boundaries. Distinguished colleagues, my conviction is that irrigation and agricultural water management will be a linchpin in this transformation. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you on this shared agenda. I wish everyone an enjoyable and very productive webinar, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. And I have to welcome Dr. Abibi. I have seen his name now. I think he's joining us. Welcome, Dr. Abibi. Dear colleagues, now I'd like to call open the World Bank. All of us know that the World Bank supports countries with sustainable intensification of agriculture through critical investments in irrigation infrastructure and the key institutional reforms which help in achieving the sustainable development goals. Colleagues, allow me to call Dr. Mark Londell, Regional Director of Sustainable Development, East and Southern Africa at the World Bank, for his remarks. By the way, Dr. Mark has good experience in Africa, China, Brazil, and Central Asia as well. Dr. Londell, you have the floor. Most welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Makara, and good morning to you. Good morning, Honorable Excellency Ambassador Josefa Sako from AU Commissioner for RIA. Good morning to Dr. Mark Smith, Director General for IWMI, and eventually to our Dr. Abebe Haile Gabriel, Assistant Director General in FAO. It's my great pleasure to be with you all this morning, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to this first webinar on the Comprehensive Continental Irrigation and Agriculture Water Management Strategy, organized by the AU Commission, FAO, and the World Bank, and focusing very crucially on complementary and new pathways to improve agricultural water productivity and resilience. Today, I'd like to focus on one of the modes in particular, so-called farmer-led irrigation development, or FLID in short. Over the past 30 years, I've been associated with programs on farmer-led irrigation, primarily smaller schemes, though some large ones as well, in countries as diverse as Tajikistan, Armenia, Brazil, China, and many in the Africa region over the last 10 years, Mozambique, Madagascar, Malawi, just to note a few. I've always been very impressed by the organizational capital that farmers can harness when they're given the opportunity to set up irrigation at a scale that can engender true mutual cooperation and coordination. These types of programs are usually more sustainable than the complex, much more larger traditional irrigation schemes, with these latter traditional schemes being somewhat more prone to high cost, inefficient use, and decay from the lack of adequate maintenance. So the emphasis on farmer-led irrigation development reflects the understanding that its complementary approach to the traditional approach to irrigation, and FLID offers much potential in the near future. Over 80% of livelihoods in Africa are based directly on natural resources, with smallholders generating the lion's share of agricultural output, playing a key role in local and national food security. While smallholder production growth through area expansion has been more prevalent, FLID enables sustainable area intensification and therefore improve sustainability and climate resilience. So it's been very encouraging to see that FLID has picked up rapidly in the past decade, as it's a cost-effective and scalable agricultural water management solution driven by farmers directly as they establish and consolidate their irrigation schemes. To date, FLID has improved the lives of millions of farmers and with millions more to come. Still, we need to enhance efforts to follow a quick scale-up of FLID. Many African farmers have done this for decades, often very successfully, and at a fraction of the cost of most alternatives. Still, many others have not been able to participate, and supporting them will be necessary to boost the inclusivity, resilience, and sustainability and efficiency of irrigation. This requires addressing multiple challenges that hamper wider adoption. These include solidifying supply chains for agricultural products, appropriate technology and services, addressing the high upfront costs and the lack of access to finance, and also focusing on inclusivity in the outreach and access, as well as resolving land and water tenure complexities. The FLID initiative is dedicated to addressing these challenges based on partnerships at all levels. It connects and enhances the work of diverse stakeholders, including smallholder farmers, local government entities, partners such as the African Union Commission, and development finance institutions. The FLID initiative functions at two reinforcing levels. First, it looks at the country level with a focus on business development and operationalizing the FLID approach at the project level. This initiative has been implementing diagnostic studies in countries such as Cameroon, Niger, Mali, Malawi, Chad, Uganda, Ghana, and piloted the approach in a number of World Bank finance projects. Second, it works at a global level and regional levels, focusing on policy advocacy, strategy, and partnerships to maintain FLID in irrigation and drainage development policies. One example is the recently launched World Bank Finance Uganda Microscale Irrigation Program. This is a part of a broad local government service delivery program, including health, education, water, and environment, and it's helping farmers to buy irrigation equipment at a lower cost. It also works through local governments in instructing farmers how to use the equipment and organize their efforts among themselves for further organizational efficiencies in marketing and sourcing. In FLID and in other pathways, the continental irrigation and water management strategy is an example of new thinking and a collaborative model. We believe it can deliver big wins on inclusive economic growth and the sustainable use of land and water, which is especially important, as was noted earlier, in the short and long-term recovery from impacts of COVID-19 and climate change. In sum, we will build on the momentum generated here as we travel into the next phase, when the strategy documents are disseminated to African Union member countries to enhance eventual adoption and mainstreaming. We're grateful to the leaders and partners that have worked on the strategy with great creativity and passion, that we can move closer to a sustainable, resilient, and inclusive world. Our steadfast cooperation will continue to create opportunities for positive change, always aiming to achieve our vision of a water and food secure world for all. Thank you for your attention. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you, Dr. London, for these remarks. And really, to join us, it is good for us, and as well, Dr. Smith. And now, all of us, my family members in irrigation sector, we know that we do have FAO water platform, which is designed to ensure the operational effectiveness across FAO departments, headquarters, and decentralized offices to achieve the organization's strategy. I'd like to call Dr. Abiba Haile Gabriel, Assistant Director General and the FAO Regional Representative for Africa. By the way, Dr. Abibi has played a key role in agriculture and sustainable development with extensive experience in sub-Saharan Africa. And he was working in management position with the African Union Commission for a long time. And he was my former director. Dr. Abibi, my director, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, my brother, Dr. Ahmed El-Mekas, Director of SAFGRAD, Excellency Ambassador Josefa Sako, Commissioner for Rural Economy and Agriculture of the African Union Commission, Dr. Mark Smith, Director General of the International Water Management Institute, Dr. Mark Lendl, Regional Director for Sustainable Development for Eastern and Southern Africa at the World Bank, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, greetings to you all. I would like to congratulate the African Union Commission and its partners for organizing this webinar, which aims to present and discuss a topic so strategic and quite central for Africa's development: irrigation, development, and agricultural water management. It has been a privilege for FAO to have accompanied the African Union Commission towards developing the framework to guide collective actions on irrigation development and water management in Africa. I should mention that this webinar is taking place on the eve of the commemoration of the World Food Day, whose theme is Grow, Nourish, Sustain. Together, our actions are our future. It means that our food systems should grow a variety of food to nourish a growing population and sustain the planet together. I must also state that FAO is turning 75 years this week. The moment perfectly fits with the call for building momentum and ramp up the commitment for effective partnerships towards an inclusive, sustainable agricultural production intensification and food systems transformation. The agenda of food and agriculture cannot be isolated from that of natural resources in general and water management in particular. What we observe from all the indicators, productivity levels, incidence of poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and so on, are not something that we can be proud of. The number of people facing hunger and malnutrition in Africa are measured in terms of hundreds of millions. About 256 million people remain hungry in Africa, and the number is rising. Healthy diets have actually become luxury for close to 1 billion people in Africa. The major causes are climate extremes such as drought, floods, transboundary pests and diseases, but also related to technology and innovation. Normally, there should have been no reason why Africa should continue to run a structural deficit in terms of food security and nutrition. Resource endowments are abundant that can sustain agriculture to produce enough or even surplus. But the problem in Africa is manifest both when there is water shortage as well as when it is abundant. Clearly, the problem largely has to do with resources management issues. Water management is not just about water per se. It's also interlinked with management of land and other natural resources in the broader realm of governance. Resource governance issues are central for sustainable agri-food systems transformation, because without it, the necessary investments, not just in terms of finance, but also in innovation, technology, and in institutions that can empower and enable stakeholders will remain pipe dreams. This framework is expected to contribute towards improved governance. If we have to go by the track record of the commitments to enhance investment finance to agriculture in the framework of CADEM, the performance has been quite dismal, as you know. This framework should therefore help in addressing the vexed question of how investment resources can be enhanced at all levels. One of the challenges in this respect has been the suboptimal level of coordination and collaboration between and among the relevant sectors, such as, for example, the key ministries in charge of agriculture and those in charge of water resources, let alone with other related sectors. At the continental level, the African Union has been making commendable efforts to improve collaboration and coherence by establishing and operationalizing the Specialized Technical Committee on Agriculture, Rural Development, Water and Environment, and putting the secretariats such as the AMCAL, the AMSEN, the AMA, and so on under this umbrella. Thanks to the laudable leadership of the African Union and the excellent collaboration with FAO and other development partners, last July, we were able to bring together ministries in charge of agriculture and those in charge of trade, as well as finance, around the table to deliberate and provide guidance on COVID-19 challenges in Africa. We need to do more of this. And definitely, intersectoral collaboration and coordination is required at country level. This framework, I believe, would contribute to such an integrative process. Developing a continental framework is important. However, the real thing rests with using the framework as a powerful instrument to bring about the desired change and transformation at the country and local level. In this respect, strong advocacy and capacity strengthening would be required. FAO has a long history and rich experience in developing and rolling out voluntary guidelines and principles to support member countries in sustainable and equitable management of natural resources, including on water governance, sustainable water management, water scarcity in agriculture, water platform, and agroecology, to mention just a few. I sincerely believe that there are opportunities to making a difference going forward. For example, renewable energy, more specifically solar energy technologies, are being more and more available. They are also becoming increasingly affordable due to the continuous decline in the cost of investment. This will enable more number of smallholder producers to be able to produce all year long, instead of just only during 1 or 2 seasons. Advances in digital agriculture and innovation has facilitated evidence-based decision-making, as well as improved risk management. For example, over the years, FAO has developed various tools that can support improved management and governance of natural resources, including water and land. Some of these include Aquastat, the database and software to monitor and manage water worldwide; AquaCrop, which is a model developed to stimulate the yield response of crops to water, particularly well suited to conditions in which water is a key limiting factor in crop production; CropWatt, a software program to calculate crop water requirements and irrigation requirements based on soil, climate, and crop data; ClimWatt, a climatic database to be used in combination with computer program CropWatt, and allows the calculation of crop water requirements, irrigation supply, and irrigation scheduling for various crops for a range of climatological situations worldwide. FAO remains committed to continue supporting the efforts of the African Union and its member countries in this regard. I thank you for your attention. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul, very much. And actually, my colleague, all of us know that water is life. If water scarcity is associated with inappropriate management, it should cause low productivity and production, and food and nutrition insecurity. This could also create conflicts, illegal migrations, and tourism. This reflects the importance of our today's event and the crucial role of having collective action. Actually, one of my indicators, the number of participants is increasing rapidly. Now I have about 233 participants. And on behalf of all of them, I have to thank Her Excellency Commissioner of Rural Economy and Agriculture of the African Union, Dr. Haile Gabriel, Dr. Londell, and Dr. Smith, for their warm welcome and inspiring remarks on the role and the future of irrigation and agricultural water management in building resilience and build back better our African food system on the continent, our beloved continent. Thank you all, and to conclude my task is the opening session. I'd like to bring your kind attention that you could have access to the framework on the AU website and at AU Safeguard website as well, and the link will be shared with all of you now. Dear colleagues, really I don't like to leave you, but the issue let me to satisfy. Just I will hand over to Dr. Petra for the second session, where you will have follow excellent speakers in the area of irrigation development and water management with excellent moderator. Personally, I respect her way of moderation, and I have to thank her for all the efforts done in preparing this event. Petra, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Almakas, and it's my pleasure to be part of this great event and all the efforts. And thank you to all the distinguished speakers. Before we start deep diving into the pathways, we wanted to give an introduction to the framework that has been developed by the African Union and its partners. Before I introduce Dr. Murray, I would like to first give a few housekeeping rules. If you would like to ask any questions to the panelists and the speakers from now on, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen below. If you'd like to interact with your attendees' colleagues, please use the chat box. It's just to separate the questions from the overall interaction. It makes it a little bit easier if we go to the Q&A later in the webinar. Without further ado, the African Union Framework on Irrigation Development and Agricultural Water Management sets forth implementation pathways to guide member states' investments in agricultural water development, use and management. As I mentioned before we deep dive, I would like to call upon Dr. Murray Agbalanhor to introduce the framework to us. He has been very much in the driver's seat, and he is a Senior Agricultural Production and Marketing Officer at the African Union Commission, based with the Semi-Arid Food Grain Research and Development Technical Office under the Department of Rural Economy and Agriculture. This office supports African Union member states in building resilient agricultural-based livelihoods by promoting the dissemination and adoption of climate-smart technologies to mitigate the challenges associated with dryland agriculture. Dr. Murray, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Petra. Good morning, good afternoon, distinguished participants. You will all agree with me that the opening speeches we just heard have already set the scene for this webinar. However, it is my pleasure to present the African Union Framework for Irrigation, Development, and Agricultural Water Management to our esteemed participants at this webinar. Okay, by way of introduction, I'll talk about the need for this framework. The Irrigation Development and Agricultural Water Management Framework, which we abbreviate as IDAWM, was actually a response to the various concerns that were raised on the fate of agricultural sector in the continent. We usually hear the saying that the agricultural sector is the economic backbone of many African states. There is a need to strengthen this backbone for resilience so that it will be able to furnish sustainable livelihood. Issues of low production and declining productivity, unreliability of rain-fed agriculture against the backdrop of high climatic variability, issues of widespread incidences of aridity, increased episodes of hunger and high food import bill have rekindled the interest in agricultural intensification through a reliable access to sufficient quality and quantity water. A 2016 report by the International Water Management Institute did estimate that about 29% more irrigated land would be required by the year 2025, which is less than 5 years from now, in order to sustain food production and reduce poverty in the continent. At the government level and policy level, the African heads of states and government, through a number of decisions and declarations, have been emphatic on the need for irrigation development and agricultural water management practices to drive agricultural growth and development in the continent. When Her Excellency was giving her opening speech, she did mention some of these commitments. It is worthy to note that the 2003 CADEP Declaration, the 2004 CITE Declaration, as well as the 2008 Sharm el-Sheikh Declaration, all laid credence to these commitments. The IDAWM framework was developed by the African Union Office for Semi-Arid Zone, which we call SABRAD, and it was endorsed by the AU Ministerial Specialized Technical Committee, and also endorsed in February 2020 by the African Union Executive Council. The framework aims to support regional and country level design and review of agricultural water management policy and strategies. It aims to stimulate interest in agricultural water management practice and to set as a prompt for new ideas and details in regional and country institutional interventions. On the right of the screen, this is the cover page of the framework. The link to both the French and English versions were shared with our invitation to this webinar, and I'm sure most of us have also been able to access it. In terms of the structure of the framework is organized in 3 chapters. Chapter 1 set forth the context, the rationale for the framework, the methodological approach adopted, and the agricultural water management spectrum covered by the framework. Chapter 2 is a review of previous attempts at irrigation development and agricultural water management in the continent. It highlights the success and challenges that we experienced. Chapter 3 is a presentation of the 4 proposed but not mutually exclusive development pathways and the associated sustainability elements. The chapter discusses 7 cross-cutting development issues, which include inclusivity, policy and institutional support, private sector engagement, financing to knowledge management and transfer. The chapter closed with some profound recommendations. The figure you are seeing, next slide please. The figure you are seeing is okay. The figure shows the agricultural water management spectrum of the framework. There is a common saying that crops indeed need water and not rain. So the framework addressed and covered the entire spectrum from in-situ feed conservation practices under pure rain-fed condition to the fully irrigated blue water abstraction and use scheme. Next slide. The first development pathway presented in the framework is the improved water control and watershed management in a rain-fed environment. The rationale for rain-fed agriculture covering more land and being the dominant production system practiced by majority of the smallholders is the justifiable reason for including this. There's a saying that over 80% of farm producers are smallholders and they depend fully on rain-fed agriculture. So there is a need to manage improve water control under a rain-fed system. The framework addressed some technical, institutional, financial, and agronomic considerations which are suggested as sustainability proposals. For the sake of this presentation, I will not dwell on this sustainability proposal. The team of experts, our panelists, will be discussing this in detail as the next agenda item. The second development pathway is the farmer-led irrigation development process, commonly called the FLIP process. Evidences have shown that in the last 2 decades, the FLIP process has dominated irrigation expansion in the continent. And in the opening speech of the World Bank director, he clearly stated the characteristics of the FLIP process. It is purely farmer-led, it is farmer-driven, it is market-oriented, involving farmer or groups of farmers who owns their resources. It is scalable and it is with high inclusivity. It typically irrigates the FLIP process typically irrigates small plots and it has a high ease of integration into existing cultural smallholder practices. This makes it very attractive to smallholders. The framework also highlights some technical, legal, institutional, financing, as well as agronomic considerations, which are suggested as sustainability proposal. The team of experts will dwell on this later. The rationale is that most countries, the next development pathway, next slide, is a large-scale irrigation scheme, renovation and modernization. The rationale for including these is that in most countries, public large-scale irrigation schemes already exist. And though most of them are performing below capacity, the huge cost, some cost that has been invested needs to be recovered. So modernizing and renovating this large-scale scheme makes economic sense. The framework highlights some technical, legal, institutional, managerial, attitudinal, as well as financing and agronomic considerations, which are suggested as sustainability proposal for the implementation of this pathway. The next pathway covered in the framework, next slide, is the, next slide please. Yes, is the unconventional water used for irrigation. This includes wastewater treatment, recycle and reuse. Present and future concerns of water shortage are increasing across the continent, and the fast globalizing trend, growing side by side, high water waste are justifiable reasons for this inclusion. Also, the growth of peri-urban agriculture is an impetus to consider unconventional water use for irrigation. The framework addresses the technical issues of standard, legal, ethical, institutional, attitudinal, and agronomic consideration, which are considered as sustainability factors for the implementation of this framework. Next slide. To end this presentation, it is noteworthy that the African Union Irrigation Development and Agricultural Water Management Framework acknowledges the following. One, that there is a huge demand and opportunity for the expansion and intensification of irrigation and other agricultural water management practices across the continent. The framework also acknowledges the fact that there is significant diversity in agroecological conditions, statuses of agricultural water management schemes, and the capacities for initiating, planning, and implementing the options in the member states across the continent. Also, the framework acknowledges the sovereignty and sovereign equality of member states as enshrined in the Constitutive Act of the African Union, that all member states have the right to decide on and adopt their own policies and sectoral development agendas. Thanks so much for listening. Petra, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Murray, for setting the stage. And I can see it already has sparked quite some questions in the Q&A box. So could I ask you, while I introduce the 4 pathways, to have a look at those questions and answer some of them, because I know that we are running a little bit behind schedule and I'm trying to find a balance between answering questions live and some in the chat. So somehow the slide deck has disappeared. It would be great if we could have that slide deck back, or maybe it's only on my end. But now we're moving on to the 4 pathways. So we will introduce the speakers for each of the pathways very, very briefly. You will find in the chat box a link to the actual full bios of each of the speakers. Can I introduce Professor Nuhu Hatibu from the head of East Africa and lead of Mechanization and Irrigation Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, to provide his and the team's view on Pathway 1. What does it really contain? How do we really get cracking at some of the challenges and the barriers that we have seen in Africa in addressing rain-fed agricultural systems? We had a little bit of a technical issue, it seems. We're setting the slides ready for you right now. The floor is yours. Can we move 2 more slides, please? 1 more. 1 more, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Petra. This is a joint effort with my friend, Dr. Bobakar Bari, and we will share answering the questions when they are posted on the Q&A. Next slide, please. Now, we agree with the framework in general, but we like to emphasize areas. Can we have the next slide? Areas that are very critical in terms of the key challenges that we see in managing rainwater for agriculture. So one of the things that it's been, and me and Babaka Barry, we've been working in this area, so we're also partly to blame, is that we really do not have yet a very high level planning about the rainwater that falls on the ground, on the farms, especially farm of smallholder farmers. We talk about a lot of other things like fertilizer, seed, and so on, but really, even when you go to the extension service, who is dealing with the water in that planning is very difficult to find. And therefore, wastage, conflicts of misallocation of resources are very high in this subsector. And then we'll go to zero-sum competitions. We are also not seeing adequate investment, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit in a few minutes about what kind of investment we should be seeing in managing the rainwater. Things like water harvesting and storage, they are not integrated in the systems of ag development investment. So when you look at the percentage that goes to formal irrigation infrastructure and what goes to the management of rainwater on the soil, there is actually very little happening. And that, of course, leads to the precision management of water for rainwater for agriculture. Consequently, we in Africa, we are underutilizing our land potential in the production of food, and we are a big importer of food at the moment. We are still registering low yields, although we pushed a lot the use of seed and fertilizer. But now the availability of water in rain-fed agriculture has become the limiting factor, and the yields continue to be low even where all this adaptation did happen. The most critical issue is because of the low performance of rain-fed agriculture, it cannot attract youth, and therefore the youth labor is no longer available to rain-fed farming. And of course, it affects the supply of nutritious food because only very limited commodities can be produced in rain-fed farming under the current level of water management. And certainly, we are not able to deal with the resilience, to build resilience, especially in shocks emanating from climate variability, but also with the risk-averse financing system. Very few people will finance rain-fed farming with the current level of water management and control. So again, that is a major problem of resilience with respect to rainwater, rain-fed farming. Next slide, please. So when you look here, this iconic diagram, which has been around for quite some time, it shows that generally we've got adequate volume of water that falls on the ground. And in this period, which is shown here, we have got only 2-3 aspects where water was below optimal, or around the mean. Now, so what is the problem? So the problem is that we are not really, as I said earlier, prioritizing investing in the harvesting that water and the storage. But the most important thing is the main store where we can actually manage and store that water is in the soil. Now, it is in the soil management system that are actually lacking. Certainly, African Union is talking about taking the handhold to the museum, but we are not there yet. That is the biggest asset, is our rainwater that is falling on the farm, but the management of that water through a handhold certainly will not get us anywhere. So the issues of mechanizing, especially subsoil tillage and other systems that can enable the soil to hold more water and store more water is very important, because certainly from this diagram, we don't have any shortages of water. And therefore, we need to upgrade how we consider local runoff on the farm, in gullies and in temporary impoundment. It needs to be upgraded and be counted as actually water, and water that requires to be managed. And there must be departments, either in land ministry or in agricultural ministry, responsible for the building capacity and investment for managing water in the soil. And at the moment, this is falling through the cracks, because all the institutions that we have overseeing agriculture, overseeing water resources, overseeing land resources, and overseeing the environment, none of them considers this big asset as their responsibility. And therefore, this leads to a limited public sector investment or supported private investment in rainwater harvesting and storage for supplementary irrigation. Next slide, please. Which brings us to what we think, we may be wrong, but what we think could be the gaps in the current framework, the AU IDAWM framework with respect to ability to manage rainwater on the farm. We believe that we need to increase an attention to modern ICT, remote sensing, GIS, big data, and the Internet of all things to use to improve forecasting of rainfall and production of seasonal specific guidelines for water control, watershed management in rain-fed farming. Every season is different. Without adequate amount of predicting and forecasting, which requires big data, GIS, and so on and so on, we are not able to provide what we call season-specific guide. That's the only way we can manage water effectively, is with season-specific guidelines. Blanket methods, blanket guidelines don't work because every season is different. There is no mean rainfall, it is always a different number. The second issue is to link public sector investment in physical infrastructure, such as roads, railways, and others, to rainwater harvesting. And it is quite possible. There is so much opportunity that is missed in rainwater harvesting for shallow water storage and so on and so on, if we could link this to physical infrastructure investment, which are huge in Africa. And there is a huge opportunity there to provide every locality with water for rain-fed farming if the infrastructure that we're investing in can actually be used for that purpose. The other issue that we're supposed to be added is weather indexed insurance. This is also important to drive investment. When you're insured, you can take the risk and be able, but we don't have any traction so far on the effort to introduce weather indexed insurance. Certainly, meteorological data is partially available, and that one is to be improved, again, with the availability of new technology, ICT technology can do that. And also, when in a country, we should allocate. I know our colleagues on the other path will talk about themselves, but this path feels that there should be a critical comparison of return to investment between irrigation versus improved rain-fed water management. And where we get bigger returns on improved rain-fed water management, then we should put the money there. And that will be more frequent than you think. And we really need to increase our support to efficient access to technology. There's a lot of technology globally, but our smallholder farmers, as I said, many of them, the only technology they have on their hand to manage rainwater on their field is a hand hoe, nothing else. And all those technologies are available. And I think the most important thing that needs to be added into the framework is what are the main pathways that we can use to get to those technologies. Next slide, please. So what we suggest as a result, if we add this into the IDMA, we are certainly going to attract investment. However, we want to talk specifically about investment. And there are four things that we think are important because we need more investment in managing rainwater on the farm. And we need to prioritize complementary public sector investment in resource governance. And that one, we need to really consider rainwater and runoff as a resource and how is it governed on the watershed. Then capacity building of individual farmers and the institutions about this particular aspect of managing rainwater on the farm, including providing technologies, as I said earlier. And then the infrastructure along the entire value chain to enhance access to markets, to drive commercialization of rain-fed farming. Again, there is almost a match of one-to-one between rain-fed farming and subsistence farming. We need to remove that, so that, especially in the food production. Okay, we've got rain-fed farming in some cash crops, but in food production, we see a lot of almost concurrence that if you've got rain-fed farming, is going to be subsistence. We need to change that one because the investment that you require to manage water in the soil require income, and therefore that farming must be sort of linked to markets. And we have to have a focus on attracting private sector investment And one area that is very critical is to really bring SMEs who will supply especially higher services. A lot of the technological improvements, subsoiling, plowing, and so on that we need to manage water in the soil cannot be owned by every farmer, every smallholder farmer. So the most important way of, best way of getting those technologies to the smallholder farmers is to have professional higher services that provide that. And this can be really built into the SME businesses who can also do the increased access to markets. And then another area that is very critical is to drive development and implementation of supportive physical regimes, removing and minimizing barriers to access to finance. And finally, we need to develop innovative business models that can really reach the smallholder and the SMEs that we in Agra we call them hidden middle. Thank you very much for your attention. Shukran.
Thank you so much, Professor Hatibu. And this is a perfect segue into the first question that we would like to ask our audience, because you touched upon a few important barriers to further accelerate agricultural water management solutions to support rainfed farming systems. And you will see a polling question pop on your screen for those who are using the Zoom software. For those who are accessing through the web, you will unfortunately not be able to vote. So we were wondering, for this particular pathway that Professor Hatibu just presented, what is the main difficulty? It's a single choice question. So in your specific countries, what do you see as the main difficulty? We will leave it open for another 15 seconds. Just to get a bit of a stock taking of where we stand on the African continent. Seems to be a neck and neck race between operational costs and financing and policy and regulation at the moment. Throughout the opening remarks and also now we have actually seen financing and business models coming back more and more. So it seems to be really a core topic also to today's webinar. Okay, we will shortly have to close this particular vote. We will repeat the same question after each of the pathways. So be prepared to cast your vote. And we will discuss some of these challenges then in the Q&A section with our experts and our panelists. Maxwell, can I please ask you to, thank you very much. So normally if technology works well, you would see on your screen the current opinion of all the attendees, which shows that the majority does feel operational costs and financing is one of the main challenges, but also we do acknowledge that all the other points are equally important, of course, to have impact. So let's close the poll and let's move to the second pathway. The second pathway will be implemented or presented by Dr. Gabriela Izzi, a senior irrigation specialist at the World Bank Group, who has driven a lot of the new developments of farm-led irrigation globally with a team at the World Bank, but also with partners of other organizations. Gabriela, I'm gonna give the floor to you to enlighten us on the farm-led irrigation pathway.
Thank you, Petra, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It is an honor to present you the second pathway of the framework, which concerns the farmer-led irrigation development process, or FLID process in short. So when we think about the FLID process, first of all, we need to think about smallholder farmers. It can be an individual smallholder farmer, or it can be a small group of farmers. The key element on these farmers is that they are market-oriented, they are entrepreneurial, and because they produce to sell, they are also open to invest some of their little money in improving their agricultural production, including by investing in irrigation. A key element of FLID is that when we think about FLID, we don't have to think about a one irrigation technology. FLID is all about the farmers making their own choice about irrigation technology based on their specific situation, on their preference, as well as on their financial capacity. And also when we think about the fleet process, we need to think about farmers having water close by, which means they can develop irrigation in an independent way. Now, fleet is already happening across Africa. We don't know the extent of fleet because it's happening off the chart without really being monitored. So we don't know how many hectares on top of the 18.6 million hectares of formally irrigated land are developed through the fleet process. But we know that we are talking about millions of hectares across the continent. The other interesting bit is that there's a lot of potential for future expansion of irrigation across Africa, this as opposed to other continents. It's important to keep in mind that this future expansion can happen for 70–80% of the land through small-scale infrastructures. And because it's small-scale infrastructure, this kind of irrigation development can be more easily led by farmers. So as we think about the public sector, we also think that the public sector has a huge potential to catalyze the fleet process. And catalyze the fleet process means making the process faster, means to scale it up, which means to make more farmers, smallholder farmers across Africa, being able to develop irrigation by themselves, which essentially means making the fleet process more inclusive. And also the public sector can have a key role in making the fleet process more sustainable over time. And when we think about the fleet the catalyzing fleet through the public sector, we need to think first of all about the role of the staff or central ministries, local governments, irrigation agencies that work every day with farmers. So this staff this public staff needs to undergo a huge mind shift in the sense that they need to stop seeing themselves as implementers of public-led irrigation projects and start seeing themselves as facilitators of irrigation development, which is led by the farmers. So really shifting from implementers to facilitators of a process. Let's see, okay. Now, when we think about public intervention, the big question is what's the public intervention that we need to support? And the first thing is that there is no one answer to this question. Each of you from each of the country from where you are calling from today is going to have a different answer. So it's all of a matter how you find your answer. And in order to find your answer, you need first of all to understand the fleet process in your country, the extent of the fleet process, as well as the potential of the fleet process in terms of natural resource potential, water and land, as well as potential for farmers to benefit from irrigation. And then on the other side, you need to think about the barriers for farmers to develop irrigation through the fleet process, which can be in finance, technology, knowledge, markets, and policy and legal. And as you think about the intervention to overcome these barriers, you need to think that this intervention needs to adapt over time. Essentially, the barriers that farmers suffer today in your country are not going to be the same barriers that are going to suffer 5 years from now. You need to think about trade-off and synergies, and also think about the risk of unintended outcomes, notably the risk of sidelining farmers in the irrigation development process. Now, oftentimes when we think about how to help farmers overcome barriers, we oftentimes identify that the biggest barrier for farmers is the financial constraint to afford irrigation. And indeed, we have already a question on this in the Q&A. So how can we make irrigation more affordable for smallholder farmers? First of all, the obvious answer is that we can act on the finance bucket by providing subsidies. This is something which is have been ongoing for years in Nigeria, in Niger, in Rwanda. This is what Uganda is trying to do right now. But it's not the only answer. You can make irrigation more affordable acting on the finance aspect, for example, by providing guarantees to financial institutions and making it easier for farmers to get loan to purchase irrigation equipment themselves. Also, you can make irrigation more affordable by lowering the cost of the irrigation equipment. You can do it, for example, by acting on the policy and legal, so by reducing import tariffs on irrigation equipment coming from abroad. We are seeing this in Ethiopia right now. Or you can act on technology. And indeed, you can facilitate technological innovation, for example, in solar. And indeed, we can see a question on this in the Q&A. And this is, for example, what Kenya is trying to do very strongly, not only by working on the solar aspects, but also on other technologies like facilitating pay-as-you-go through mobile payments. Then an indirect way to make irrigation more affordable is by acting on markets. So you can strengthen the relationship between farmers and value chain actors. By having farmers gaining more money, they have more money available to invest in irrigation. But also financial institutions can see a stronger linkage between farmers and value chain actors as a further guarantee to provide a loan. And then another example is to act on the knowledge aspect. So everything which is adaptive learning and knowledge sharing. And it's important to keep in mind it's not only knowledge of farmers, but knowledge of all the private sector actors involved in the irrigation space. Now, as we move to the end of the presentation of this second pathway, few takeaways for you to keep in mind as you find your own solution in your own country. First of all, FLEED can be about smallholder farmers, but the cumulative impact is huge. Second of all, no one solution. Find your own solution rather than copying other countries' solutions. The third one is that data is very powerful. FLEED has been happening off the chart, not monitored. But if you monitor the FLEED process, you are going to be able to provide complementary investments like roads, value chain investments that are going to help farmers making the most out of their investment in irrigation. And lastly, what we are seeing is that catalyzing the FLEED process requires a massive behavioral change and mental shift in the staff of public institutions, at the hierarchy of public institutions, as well as in developing organizations, including organizations like the World Bank. So let's try to be a catalyst ourselves for this change and support smallholder farmers in implementing their own irrigation projects. Thank you very much. Back to you, Petra.
Thank you, Dr. Easy. Very inspiring words to end your presentation. Be a catalyst for change and overcoming barriers by finding contextually relevant solutions for your country. So thinking through some of those barriers that might exist in your country, what do you think are main barriers for this particular pathway to really accelerate? Normally the poll should be popping up on your screen again, and I'm looking forward to see your vote. Compared to the first pathway, it seems that the second pathway has not only a similar operational costs, but also policy and regulatory as equally important barriers at the moment. Something has happened to the slide. Like if we can have the slides back up, that would be great. Okay, we'll be 10 more seconds and then we will have to close the poll and move on to our third pathway. Okay, so it seems like just with pathway 2, operational cost and financing seems to be a really hurdle, and we will come back to that in some of the Q&A questions that already have been asked as well in the Q&A. Could I now ask our IT team to please put up the third pathway slide whilst I introduce Dr. Jonathan Dennison. Dr. Jonathan Dennison is a senior irrigation and water resources specialist and has done independent consultancies for the World Bank and for FAO in the field of farmer-led irrigation, irrigation schemes more broadly across the African continent. He will provide insights on pathway 3 on how we can really tackle the challenges on irrigation scheme modernization in Africa. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Greetings, colleagues. I'm very pleased to be presenting some broad ideas on the challenge of irrigation scheme development and modernization. And that's on behalf of my two colleagues, Valera and Bansi. So the first slide, there seems to be some lag. The first slide helps us focus on who and what we are talking about. It shows a simple grouping of irrigation systems by how they are managed. And when we're talking schemes, we're talking collective management. So larger public schemes are usually managed by government agencies, and smaller schemes are often managed by smaller groups themselves. Now, so a lot of the emphasis on irrigation scheme modernization is on the governance element, because it is that part that makes them unique, and that's often where these schemes have failed in the past. So it's not totally disconnected from individual systems, because on and around irrigation schemes, it's a common sight that the individuals are pumping from tailwater, from drainage ditches, and even increasingly on schemes where there's unreliable canal supply, farmers are reverting to digging shallow wells and pumping in a kind of flood mode, that pathway 2 mode, integrating with schemes in a sort of a complex interaction. Also, corporate irrigation farms have a big role to play in terms of agribusiness support, outgrower relationships, and secure marketing arrangements. So before we jump forward, it's useful to take a quick look backwards, because the technical choices of the past dictate to some extent what can be done in the future. We know that institutions, power, practices, and human behavior don't change quickly. Now, these schemes are old, 30 to 60 years, so the way things have been done are entrenched. They are flood irrigation schemes, which is a reality that's not likely to change very soon. Performance has been very low historically in whatever metric one might choose. The water resource realities have shifted in the last many decades due to watershed degradation, climate change, changes in sectoral priorities. Many of the schemes that were pumped were developed in a time when energy was cheap, which is no longer the case. And the primary purpose for development has often shifted from social and settlement reasons and doesn't necessarily fit the current business realities. So the schematic on the left shows a classic spiral of decay, which represents what has happened in many attempts to rehabilitate or modernize schemes, where there's been a big emphasis on the concrete and the steel, and not sufficient emphasis on the governance of how the water is going to be managed, distributed, and fees collected. The spiral is that water surfaces decline, farmers don't have the water they need for production, they can't generate profits, and there's no revenue to support the ongoing operation. So the question is how to intervene and trigger a different and sustainable cycle. And we suggest that the modernization approach has to be reframed to a service-oriented approach where a water service is provided and a payment is made. The operator can be a water user association, the group of farmers themselves, or it could be a large agency or a commercial operator. But that pins on market farming for financial sustainability, because a portion of the profits have to be generated and taken back into the system maintenance, whether that's 5, 10, or 15% of a farm gate profit would depend on the context. The other point that we're wanting to communicate is that water productivity needs to be an overarching goal that frames investment decisions. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. And then the third thing is that infrastructure investment has to support these agendas of water productivity and of market farming and of service orientation. Infrastructure is in service of those goals and should not dictate what must evolve on the schemes. So in moving into the kinds of interventions, the farmer's role in service-oriented interventions is central. And to do that, the legal environment has to be enabling, especially in terms of water user association or irrigation organization rights to use infrastructure and to collect fees for the use of that infrastructure and manage those fees for operations and maintenance. At the same time, the service levels that one wants to position within a service-oriented framework have to be pragmatic. The mode of measurement of how you're going to provide a service in a rudimentary system has to be in keeping with that system, whether it's by hours or a rotation for a half day. One would hope to move towards more sophisticated systems with more sophisticated measurement, and ICT has a role to play there, but there needs to be that pragmatism. And then payment, expectations of payment have to be based on actual delivery. Farmers cannot be expected to pay if they don't get water. Then the other part of farmer involvement is around participation, and it's not just participation sitting in meetings and listening, it's participation with agency, to have power in rulemaking of how water is allocated, enforced, and in what designs are made and how that impacts on their governance. At the same time, as farmers have to participate, there needs to be pragmatism about how much responsibility is fair and realistic to delegate onto the shoulders of water user associations. And there's a real need to focus on capacity that is actually in place and to avoid organizational overload for farmer groups, because their business is farming, it's not in water services provision. So responsibilities may need to be limited to tertiary or secondary levels. And that takes us to the bulk water supply, which is the big sort of engineering works, the big concrete and steel. So we know that irrigation agencies have historically performed weakly across Africa. And private sector has a major potential role to play in future operations. But at the same time, in Africa, private sector has not found much traction in that operational sphere. And one of the reasons is that the African irrigation reality is one of many smallholders. And that comes with high risks because of production, because of fee collection, because systems are not suitable for closing off water, and there's social and land tenure issues which complicate that kind of enforcement, which may be relevant in other continents, is very difficult in an African context. So in looking at how to facilitate and mobilize the strengths of private sector, we need to be looking at that risk curve, the red curve on the left, and moving away, at least in the initial years, from this concession type thinking to a more fully public management type contract, where knowledge around the risks and around operational behaviors can be collected and generated in 3 to 5 year first phase type contracts, and then start to progress up the risk cycle where private sector takes more risks and then more profit as a result. The other kind of solutions are more creative, where one is looking at, for example, reallocating land on a scheme, creating blocks which can then be rented out to an agribusiness estate who operates as a water service provider, providing water to the smallholders who use the revenue generated from the land leasing in order to pay for that water, which gives a net gain. So effectively, farmers can get water at very low or even no financial cost, and use that to get a net gain with much higher productivity from smaller plots of land. So this requires land mapping and attention to tenure. Then the last theme to touch on is to guide decisions around water productivity. And this is important because water productivity faces the reality that the value of water is increasing with time. And it's an imperative to maximize benefits from each cubic meter of water, both to the farmer and to the wider economy. So irrigation agronomy has real potential to increase yields per unit of water through cultivar choices, timing of planting, weeding, fertility management, and on-farm agricultural water practices. So it makes sense then that when one is thinking modernizing, that you're really thinking about driving also agronomy agendas, agronomy interventions which support that. Similarly, when one's looking at the technical aspect, modernization needs to focus on water control, because it's, excuse me, it's water control that incentivizes farmers to use water more carefully. So that means control infrastructure, and it means monitoring, and it means management systems that are feeding the right amount of water across the system to the right people at the right time. And there, ICT has a critical role to play in monitoring and compliance. And that can be as simple as a WhatsApp photo with the steel rule in a canal, or it could be high-tech GSM flow monitoring, real-time information going back to the grouping. So efficiency also is obviously important, but the focus on efficiency needs to be on the greatest returns and not necessarily on the on-farm technologies. And that's because the question needs to be asked, efficiency for what? If it's efficiency for the farmer, that is a different question than if one's looking at efficiency for the basin. And if it's for the basin, one needs to be targeting the non-recoverable fraction, that part of the water which doesn't seep into the groundwater or go back into the river systems through drainage. So the efficiency question, one needs caution to jump to the kinds of ideas that we've had before and to really be interrogating that. So water productivity drives then thinking in 4 parallel themes. Irrigation organizations need to be supported. Infrastructure needs to be developed with management and control in mind, suitable to the irrigation organizations, potentially with private sector involvement. Agronomy is central, and that should all move and support a business farming agenda. So in summary then, to close, as countries look forward as to how to tackle the low performance of the many irrigation schemes across Africa, the first question is to ask, is the policy and legal environment enabling? And that comes to the water user organizations, what rights and responsibilities they have, and what deficiencies are in law, and those potentially need to be remedied because they can be a major limitation to modernization. Then development and political priorities need to be aligned in terms of economic, poverty, labor, etc. And interrogation of land tenure, potentially for block leasing, and the implications that need to be considered. The next question is around, is the data available? And there's a list of criteria to look for with the intention to prioritize. And the changes in resource availability would be one of the key factors to consider there. So in summary, taking steps to tackle the modernization challenge would start with a service-oriented strategy where farmers, inclusive of all farmers, are the decision makers and are placed central. Private sector needs to be considered as a key player in bulk water operations. Water productivity needs to be a guiding theme. Thinking needs to be steered towards markets and farm profitability, and underpinning that is productivity and agronomy. Green solar energy for pumping has long-term implications for financial sustainability and upfront funding costs are potentially huge, but lifetime costs are indisputably positive. And then reliability of supply needs to contemplate conjunctive use. So bringing in groundwater use into surface water use to deal with the kinds of seasonal fluctuations that have become more severe. So thank you, colleagues, and we trust this has prompted some thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dennison. Definitely a lot of food for thought. It's all about figuring out the right enabling environment, having the data, but putting the farmers at the center in a business inclusive approach. So if we are thinking through how to make this or overcome some of the modernization barriers in this third pathway, what are the main barriers in this particular case? Can I ask to launch the poll? And there we go. So what is some of the main barriers for this particular pathway? Is it the financing? Is it the policies? It's of course always a combination of everything, but what are the most predominant hurdles at the moment? I'm gonna leave the poll open for another 10 seconds. Okay, so it seems that for this particular pathway, it's really about combining the policy and regulatory as well as the operational costs and financing to overcome some of the modernization challenges going forward. It seems across the three pathways, those two topics continue to pop up. I'm curious about the fourth pathway and whether we would see a similar pattern appearing. For pathway number 4, which is about the unconventional water use, I would like to invite Dr. Josiane Nikima, who is a global lead for circular economy and water pollution at the International Water Management Institute, to enlighten us on where she sees the potential. She has been working on this topic for a very long time, together with Dr. Hans Komakek from Wise Futures. Dr. Nikima, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Let me move straight into the subject. Because we didn't have much time available, we only have 10 minutes, my colleague and I decided to really focus on selected unconventional water sources and to highlight the real potential that could exist with those water sources for irrigation, and also what could be the solutions that could be implemented to address some of the drawbacks that exist with those mechanisms, those systems. So the first one I will talk about will be on the wastewater, use of wastewater from sewer lines. Then I'll talk about the gray wastewater, which is coming from stormwater runoff drains and is available in urban areas, many cities. And then we'll also touch on the fecal sludge, because fecal sludge, which is the sludge that accumulates in the on-site sanitation systems, being pit latrines or septic tanks, are actually one of the most abundant waste that is available in the urban setup and also in the rural areas. So we'll touch on the direct irrigation, which can be under controlled or uncontrolled conditions. And these sources could be used directly for irrigation, or they can be used indirectly, for instance, through groundwater recharge. So when we recharge the groundwater, water can pump up again for multiple uses, including for irrigation, but it could also be for domestic use. And then also there is an opportunity
Okay, we seem to have lost Josiane here for a second. Josiane, can we try to get you back on? Maybe switch off your camera. No, unfortunately, she has dropped out. Thankfully, we do have a recording of her, which we will, but before we will play it, we will need to make sure that we have the right place settings sorted. So if everything is okay, Funke, can you please? Thank you. Please, under the select the microphone button, can you click same as system? Otherwise, we can't hear Josiane.
Can I talk about it?
Sure, Hans, please.
Yeah.
Thank you for stepping in. Very much appreciated. Go ahead.
Good. So thank you very much. If you can go back one slide, please. Then, yeah. So what Josiane was talking here is that we focus on 3 key elements when we are talking about unconventional water sources. Specifically, this area, you can talk about many other areas. I've seen in the chat box people talking about road runoff, which is also one of the sources. But we are saying here that groundwater can be one area where wastewater that has been treated can be used as a recharge, but we can also use wastewater directly as nutrients, not only for irrigation. So we will focus on this area. Please, next slide. So on the wastewater side, of course, we are aware that in the urban African continent, not quite a lot of areas have waste or sewer connections, but this is still a major area where agriculture can be developed, especially irrigated agriculture from the use of treated wastewater. And there are already significant examples here which we put forward. A number of cases in Algeria, Morocco, Senegal, where we see the number of wastewater treatment plants that has been developed and the percentage that is being reused. You could see here that in Algeria and Morocco, we are talking about 7 to 15% that is being reused. Of course, it's still a small fraction, but this particular sector has a lot of potential given that the African urban areas are expanding. And for now, most of this wastewater reuse is taking place for either for trees, agriculture, green parks, and to a certain extent, groundwater recharge, but also landscape taking place. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are talking only about trees, but in many urban areas, perishable crops are being grown with treated wastewater. Next slide, please.
Yes, sorry, I got disconnected for some time. Sorry for that.
I will leave you there. Please continue.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just to continue on what you were saying, maybe the thing we can highlight over here will be the importance of policy in these particular cases. So when we want to ensure or to adopt reuse of wastewater, treated wastewater, we have to pay attention to ensure that the 2 types of guidelines that are necessary for that are in place. So we need guidelines for the treated water quality to know what treatment levels should be expected from treatment facilities. And then we also need guidelines to characterize or to define what type of treated wastewater can be used for what type of crops, especially in the local context. So one thing that is very useful in this particular case, if you can go back, is to ensure that, can you please go back to the previous slide? Okay, yes. So one thing that is useful and very important is to remember that the WHO has provided some guidelines which can be used by countries who do not have their own guidelines in place. So those guidelines can be starting points, and they are very useful to define how to proceed, how to make sure to use the treated wastewater in a safe way. Another point I will mention concerning that is there are several benefits that can be harnessed in this particular case. So benefits such as the nutrients that can be short-circuited, the pollution being reduced from the wastewater being treated, ability to regenerate some areas that were completely depleted, irrigate golf courses, opportunity for jobs and livelihoods. But there are also some risks that are associated, and we really need to make sure that those risks are mitigated properly. One risk is sometimes the presence of industrial wastewater along with the municipal wastewater streams. And those industrial wastewater may include contaminants such as heavy metals, which could be difficult to treat under normal or basic treatment systems. And in those cases, we have to make sure that we monitor those contaminants well so that they do not enter into the food chain through the irrigation. Looking at other risks, environmental and health, and also sometimes possible opportunity for stigma for those who are interested in using the wastewater for reuse. So the main lessons, some key lessons that come out and can highlight in this particular case are really the need to really monitor those impacts in the long term to ensure that there is continuous acceptance of this reuse scheme, but by not only farmers, but also the end users, those who are going to consume the products. There is no resistance associated with that. And this has been successfully implemented in some cities and countries, and we can learn from those locations to implement this in other places. The second point I will emphasize is on the use of untreated wastewater from sewers. So it can be connected to a treatment facility which is not functional, or it is from the drains, which are in the urban area normally meant to collect storm water. But for some reason, they also receive some gray wastewater, and this becomes a source of water that farmers can use. And this irrigation that is happening with this water is mostly farmer-led. And in this case, we have to consider adopting or implementing the multiple barrier approach for safe use. What is that multiple barrier approach? It's actually a mechanism or a principle that has been adopted, promoted by WHO, World Health Organization, some time ago. It was developed in collaboration with the International Water Management Institute. And the principle of this is, in the situation where we don't have wastewater treatment facilities that exist and that are functional, then we have to think about putting in place other mechanisms to really mitigate the risk. So the farmer has to put in place some safe irrigation practices to minimize risk at their level. And then when we move to the traders, they also have to put in place some strategies, especially hygienic handling practices, to make sure that there is no contamination of the food at that level, rather a reduction in the risk. And then also same for those who are going to cook the food, be it street food vendors or anyone cooking the food in his kitchen, have to make sure that they implement the right washing strategies and also the right preparation techniques. And all these mechanisms put together are going to reduce the risk for consumers. Then if you take the example of lettuce, you start when you are using wastewater for the irrigation, you begin with a contamination that is around 1 million coliform forming units per 100 grams of lettuce, which is very high and can really bring a certain number of health risks for those who are going to consume such a product. But then by putting in place the right measures, just the on-farm safety measures by farmers, we reduce this by 100 to 10,000 times. The contamination loads. And then you move on to applying the right handling measures, you reduce it by 10 times and so on. So putting in place the right mitigation strategies, by the end of the day, you get a product that is safe, though you started with a wastewater that was not safe for use. So in this particular case, one thing that is very important is to provide farmers with the right incentives so they can really decide or agree to implement the safe on-farm measures, because those measures will require them maybe extra time, extra work, extra effort, extra money, and they may not be interested in doing that unless we are able to provide opportunity to access premium sales prices through quality assurance and branding. So this has worked in several African countries, but we can also think about tenure security, providing them access to land, which is very much valued in urban areas, or credit on conditions to facilitate their access to several inputs. Let me talk about the third point, which is very important. So the fecal sludge treatment and recycling. Fecal sludge is the waste that is coming from the on-site sanitation systems. And as I said, this includes pit latrines and septic tanks. And these are the systems that are used mostly most of the largest share of the African continent is covered using this kind of on-site sanitation systems. So we don't have a lot of water that is available in terms of volume that can really be reused and to make it very much meaningful, though there is potential there. Where we have a lot of potential is really on the reuse of like recovery of nutrients and also organic matter. And this can be later on maybe composted, for instance, and used as an agricultural input to boost enhance the soil health. So this is going to help not only the water holding capacity, but also, as I said, become a source of nutrients for agriculture. And this will link up very easily with the pathway 1, because it is going to participate in the effort of really enhancing water control, especially when we are under rain-fed farming, but it's not limited, it could also be under irrigation. So fecal sludge management is extremely important and can really play a very critical role when we are able to implement the right recycling techniques. As a way of concluding, let me highlight 3 main points which are very critical when we talk about this pathway on unconventional water reuse in irrigation. So the first one is the planning. The planning is very important because to enable reuse of wastewater, we need to be able to have farming activities around the areas where the wastewater is being generated. So location is very important. Land availability around the treatment facilities are also important elements. So we have to make sure that the planning is done to take that into consideration and enable the irrigation to take place. The second point that is very important is on the policy and institutional framework. So there we need realistic quality standards, also standards that enable and encourage reuse. So if the quality standards cannot be met by affordable technologies, then of course we have issues. And if also the policies do not encourage safe reuse of water, this is also another problem. So we need those 2 mechanisms to be in place. And finally, we need to ensure that we enforce those policies, to enable the uptake. The third point is explore other solutions. Solutions such as the groundwater recharge I briefly mentioned earlier can be very interesting in Africa because they offer several opportunities which include the opportunity to reuse the water for multiple use, including irrigation, and to address several effects of climate change and many other elements. So let me stop here. Thank you very much, Petra. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Nikima. Very interesting talk, despite the little internet challenges. I think it's really great to see that also linked to the other pathways. So as we did with the other 3 pathways, we would like to hear what you think of the main barriers for the wastewater and the more unconventional water source use in agriculture in your respective countries. So it seems here the technical adaptiveness and the knowledge capacity are also quite a lot selected compared to the other pathways. It seems the technical adaptiveness and knowledge are one of the concerns. It seems this pathway is a bit more complicated than the other ones when you look at the main barriers. Okay, I think we can close the poll. Thank you, Maxwell. So for this particular pathway, whilst policy and regulatory frameworks are the main barrier, there is definitely also a request for more technical adaptiveness, information and knowledge capacity trainings to really speed up the implementation. Thank you very much to all the 4 speakers. Now that we have actually heard all the 4 pathways, we wanted to ask a few more questions about how do they compare one towards the other. So where do you see in your particular country there is already a lot of progress made? In which countries do you see, you know, there are new pathways and that we haven't really touched upon, but has a lot of promise to support? So could I ask to launch the polling that will compare the 4 pathways, and you will see four questions. It always has a slightly different question, so it's always about comparing the 4 pathways, but it asks what is the most frequently implemented. Then you can scroll down to what is the most has the most potential, but is maybe not very well developed, followed by what is the most expensive and what is the most technical challenging one at the moment. And once you have answered all the 4 pathways, you can just submit the polling. We're going to leave the poll open here a little bit longer because there are 4 questions to go through. And whilst we're leaving the poll open for another minute, and we have been at it already for 2 hours, I would say maybe we can take a little toilet break, have a glass of water, stretch your legs. We'll be We're going to leave it open for another minute, and then we will be back. Okay, so when we look at the different pathways, it seems that, and there are still some answers coming in, but that the irrigation scheme development and modernization is a bit more implemented compared to farmland irrigation and rain-fed or AWM in rain-fed systems. So despite the fact that the numbers aren't really that common on how much area is really on a farmland irrigation, it seems to be quite a well-known process in many countries in Africa. When we look at promising but relatively new, it seems that farmland irrigation is a pathway that does or is seen as a pathway that requires some extra efforts and has a lot of promise to support agricultural development. When we look at the costliness, and I think this is not a surprise among many of us, is that irrigation scheme development and modernization has been voted to be one of the more expensive investments or pathways in irrigation and agricultural development. And then it was already coming across in the previous question when we asked about the technical difficulties for implementing the pathways. The unconventional water use for irrigation does really require some more enlightening and frameworks and maybe guidance to help member states implement these pathways. So thank you very much for the polling and really giving us your opinion on the 4 pathways in your respective country. There has been quite a number of communication in the chat. Honestly, it was very difficult to keep track of all of that. And then there have been quite some number of questions posted in the Q&A. So what we're going to do now, because we're a little bit behind of schedule, I'm going to ask a few questions. I've picked out a few questions that we will be answering live, and I will ask the experts together with the panelists to really look at the Q&A box in the next section and further answer these by typing their answers in the Q&A box after the live session of the Q&A has been finalized. The first question that I picked out was one for Professor Hatibu. There was a question about how can we really enhance soil water retention in the root zone during the rainy season so that we have more water available post-rainy season. What are some of the technologies, approaches that really could boost soil water retention in the root zone? Professor Hatibu, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Actually, I answered it in my slides. One of the most important impediment of the water storage in the soil is the, first of all, water entry into the soil, which requires very high quality, but conservation tillage. So in terms of subsoiling, tillage, which requires a bit of heavy equipment, and that's why I suggested that we need to have higher services. This is the most important aspect, is the question of creating higher porosity in the soil to increase the capability of that soil to actually capture and retain water. And of course, then, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, no, I just wanted to pick up on that. So about increasing porosity, so it's about conservation agriculture, some organic amendments. Do you see room here for linking it to pathway 4?
Yes, but let me also say, so there are 2 ways, there are 2 things that we need to consider in rain-fed farming and controlling water. Is first of all to have enough capacity in the soil to store the water, but also to have little evaporation from open air. So ensuring quick crop cover or having mulching to reduce high rates of evaporation is very, very important in storing water. But I don't get your point of how do we link it to pathway 4? What was the issue there?
I saw Josiane mentioning in one of her last slides, the number 3 said, you know, we can really help organic matter build up in rain-fed farming. So maybe I can ask Hans to come in here.
Yes, thanks, Petra. I think...
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I think so you have to switch off your video.
Okay. Yeah, what we meant there was that, do you hear me? Oh, I'm lost. Okay, stop.
No, you're audible.
Yeah, what we meant here is that when we are what we are dealing with is with fecal sludge management is that there is a lot of nutrients that comes up, and we are very aware that African soil is very nutrient poor. So to enhance moisture retention, I think there is a need for improving the nutrients in the rain-fed areas, and there is potential to move nutrients from the urban areas to the rural areas where rain-fed agriculture is taking place. So it's more like a nutrient short-circuiting in place.
Excellent, thank you. I'm gonna move to pathway 2 so that we can have a few questions for each of the pathways. And Dr. Izzy, there is a question from Adebayo. He asks, if we really do want to transform the mindset of the various stakeholders that you mentioned in your presentation, especially the government and the development partners, how do we really turn their investment around to really catalyze the farmer-led irrigation development process?
Thank you. So when we think about the mindset of the public sector supporting FLID, first of all, as I said in my presentation, let's think about the staff who are working every day with the farmers. And I think there it's very important for the staff to feel that support to FLID is not due to a failure of their previous job. It's just that if we continue supporting irrigation development only using the traditional approach, if you will, of public sector-led irrigation, it's going to take decades to get where we are supposed to get the continent. So if you want, and it was also in one of the questions, FLID is not new. What is new is the catalyzing FLID. So changing the mindset of the public sector to make an ongoing process faster. So how to change the mindset of people what is key is changing the metric of success. So the way ministries, a minister tracks irrigation development in a country, it should be switched from a number of hectares of irrigated land kept through a public project, but more in terms of how much money we as a public institution were able to mobilize from the farmers to ensure that irrigation is scaled up faster. And last, for me, it's also about training people in these different jobs. We as engineers, it's easier for us to design a scheme rather than talking to a farmer and see also all the social context around how a farmer takes a decision around a certain irrigation technology. So for sure, improving the capacity of this staff in talking to farmers is going to be key. And also a lot would be said in terms of mindset shift, also in terms of development organizations, but I don't think we have the time for that. Thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you. And actually, there is a question that maybe you could allude to a little bit, and whilst we move on to pathway 3 and Jonathan, because there was a question asked from Eileen around risk, not only in terms of farmer-led irrigation, but also in terms of irrigation schemes. When we really look at subsistence and livelihoods, where in the past a lot of investments have been put towards, how do we really bring into account the risks? Because there's a lot more risks from a farmer perspective in engaging with farmer-led irrigation. So how should we include risks and risks assessment and cater for those as we scale?
Thank you. And indeed, the risk aspect is interesting because, if you will, introducing irrigation through the FLID process is a way for the farmer to control the climatic risk. But at the same time, introducing irrigation brings a risk in itself, especially when the farmer exposes himself or herself financially, for example, by taking a loan to purchase irrigation. What happens at the moment he's not able or she's not able to repay that? So I would say there are a lot of actions that the public sector can take in order to shield the farmer from a bit of that risk. And just to mention a few, first of all, when we think about supporting FLID, it's not only support the technology aspect and the adoption of irrigation. Now we need to support the farmers selling that product so that the farmer can keep making money and pay back a loan. Another aspect is for sure the try everything which is insurance. This is something that for sure the public sector can do a lot about.
Yeah, and the insurance actually also came back in the first pathway. So Jonathan, as we move on, I mean, risk, you mentioned also the businesses, the link to markets, etc. How do you see that from now a modernization point of view really come about or implement? Oh, did we lose Jonathan?
No, I'm here. Just
okay.
How the linkages to markets could come about in modernization. I think that's tied to the agenda being multifold, and that one is striving to support the farmers to run more profitable farming enterprises. And that requires multiple interventions. One is they need secure, reliable water supply so that their risks are lower. They need on-farm agronomy, and then they need, I mean, in some places the marketing links are strong and one doesn't have to worry about that element. It's not like one has to do everything everywhere. But one needs to work with groups of farmers, understand where are the critical limitations for their enterprises. And if marketing is one of them, then it's a case of looking for opportunities to either short circuit the output value chain, in other words, the links, the intermediaries in the process where farmers end up losing substantial profits, and also potentially linking them to more distant aggregators. Another element is looking at shifting crop type to higher value crops, and then helping farmers work either through farmer networks or through bridging information to suppliers, which can be as simple as providing telephone numbers, or can be as complex as creating, you know, producer organization platforms where they link with potential off-takers. So I think it's a case of facilitating those linkages and prompting farmers to link with off-takers in multiple ways.
Thank you. And you stressed that very important point, right? Linking the irrigation with the agriculture, the agronomy, the markets. And there was another question actually in the Q&A from Zeleke around how modernization, should it not really consider the use of soil moisture and nutrient monitoring tools to be trusted as a reference point, also to help with the M&E, to help with the transparency and actually the reliability of water supply and the governance and accountability of the service delivery? Do you have any ideas around that? How can we cater for that?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent comment, and it has potentially very high impact on what happens on a scheme in a number of ways. The one is that we all know that irrigators tend to over-irrigate when plants are at a young stage and under-irrigate when they're at maturity. And controlling, having more feedback on soil moisture, and there's a number of devices which are on the market, the wetting front detector, the chameleon, these are some of them. There's also remote sensing techniques. The point is that by better controlling the amount of application, there's two benefits. One is in productivity, but the second is in profitability directly, because are less nutrients lost through deep percolation. And that has an ecological benefit in reduced pollution of groundwater and agricultural pollution of nutrients broadly in the downstream ecology. So I think these are excellent tools, and I'm really pleased. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm just being a bit conscious of time. I mean, it's already 2 hours and it's super interesting. And honestly, I could go on for another hour. But then again, I'm an irrigation engineer, so likely a bit biased here. Let's move to pathway 4, Josiane, Hans. There was a question around the unconventional water use and the multi-barrier approach. In particular, Moshood was wondering, are there any specific guidelines in the framework specifically that can help to regulate the acceptable water quality required so that we prevent groundwater contamination and soil degradation as we introduce these unconventional water sources?
Thanks, Petra. Let me start, and then Hans may come in to add on. The first thing I would like to highlight is that WHO has released some guidelines on the quality of minimal quality of treated water and the possible use of the treated wastewater in different applications. So for instance, we cannot grow crops that are eaten raw with certain levels of certain qualities of treated wastewater and so on. So those guidelines are already in existence, and they have been published, I think it was in 2006 already. To prevent the groundwater quality from being degraded, This, we have to look at the soil quality, the type of soil on which the irrigation is taking place. And this is going to be a case-by-case situation. But the good news is that there is already a lot of knowledge that has been accumulated on this subject. And we already know that some soil types are able to treat the pollution to a certain extent and really safeguard the quality of the groundwater, while others are maybe more sensitive to it. So using the existing knowledge can really provide us some level of guidance on what we should do and what we shouldn't do. Of course, as we are also continuing to increase the knowledge in those areas. Thank you.
Okay. If I may add to that, I think when we are looking at the reuse of wastewater, of course it's taking place. So in almost all the urban areas of Africa, there is some kind of reuse taking place. So I think beside the recognitions of developing a guideline, I think there is a need to support farmers that are engaging with it. So when we recognize that they are contributing, there's a need to support them so that they farm in a way that minimize the risk of either contamination of groundwater or even the food that end up in the table of many other places. And the second part is, of course, our towns are normally not very well planned. And in some cases, the growth, the urban sprawl is way faster than the way we plan. So if we want to capitalize on these unconventional water sources, there's a very good need for, a strong need for planning so that we know how the town will develop, which area will be used for what kind of land use, either agriculture or urban spaces, and wastewater treatment plan. This will allow for mitigation of those risks that may arise from the unconventional water sources. But I think for the most part is to support farmers that are engaging with these water sources to produce for the market, and so that they minimize the risk that comes with it, not only for the food, but for themselves as well.
Thank you, Hans. And I'm going to throw a question, and I hope I can pronounce it in French very well, to the whole group, honestly, because it is a question that crosses, that cuts across all the different pathways. Jean asks, you know, the other problem is about really linking rainwater harvesting and the use of water and irrigation with the need to provide potable water for wash and other services to the population. How can we actually link both? What are some of the opportunities in one or across some pathways where we could actually tackle those two challenges simultaneously or linked together? Has anybody among the four pathways an idea, a solution around that? Multi-purpose use. Valère, your hand is up, please.
Okay. Yes, thank you. To have the rainwater and to have water available for the use of domestic use, the best way to have is to privilege the infiltration. Then, of course, we know there is a water collection, which is mechanic with the infrastructure to be built, and it's a bit expensive. But the best way is to privilege the infiltration into the soil. This will have a good benefit because the agriculture will benefit from it, but also the aquifers. And then for the moment, with the prices of solar energy being more and more affordable, that water you can have millions and millions of cubic meters into the soil, not farther than 20 meters, 40 meters, which is preventing water to go kilometers and kilometers away from you. So the privilege of aquifer recharging, artificial recharging, is the best way to have, because you benefit from that one, and then to have also the facility to get the water from the aquifers nearby.
Thank you, Valère. Funke, you also wanted to come in, please.
Yeah, thanks, Petra. I didn't find a place to raise my hand. So I just want to share with the participants in response to your question, a typical example that is very common in Sahelian West Africa, in Burkina Faso, part of Mali, and northern part of Ghana, for example, where we have small water infrastructures, small reservoirs that have been constructed for multiple purposes, a lot for irrigation, for livestock, for fisheries, and for domestic purpose. So one thing that is very common is that you find wells just a little bit away from this reservoir, that even during the dry season when there's water, the surface water has gone down, you still find lots of water that is used, for drinking purposes, even in the what is it called, in the wells, So that is a conjunctive use of that groundwater and the surface water, and it's used it's linked to irrigation, also linked to wash in a way. I guess that's a very practical example. I think what is not very clear from research perspective and we need to investigate is to look at that interaction very well and to see how we can enhance, optimize, as much as possible that system. We don't have much data on that interaction, but it's in existence in a large number in the Sahel. Thank you.
Thank you, Fuka. And Gabriela, you also wanted to come in here for your pathway.
Yes, indeed, because when we think about the FLID process, we are thinking about many benefits beyond irrigation. In the end, when a household decides to invest in an equipment like a pump, it's not only for irrigation. So we see for sure the aspect on domestic, especially when the household is actually living on the farm. Obviously, there are all the questions related to water quality that needs to be looked at. But also we see a lot in terms of use of the same equipment also for livestock. And also there's also another element which is not only water, it's about the energy. The moment farmers have access to a solar pump, they start recharging their phone, they just start using that energy also for other purposes of their households.
Okay, thank you. So it's about linking energy and water and irrigation and domestic use and many other services across the different pathways if we really truly want to catalyze change. We are really running out of time, so I unfortunately need to close the Q&A with our experts today for this webinar. There were some other comments or remarks to be made, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Murray to actually get us through the last part of the webinar and provide the concluding sections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petra. The time is fast spent. I can see many of our participants are dropping out, but I know it is not because of interest. The webinar has been very lively and very insightful. I think it is the issue of signal, the issue of maybe power that is affecting the number. But we're at the last stage. We'll have a direct talk. They are going to talk on in their respective region. Without wasting time, let me call on Dr. Fred Wango from IGAD. Dr. Fred, the floor is yours, please.
I think let me start by saying all protocols observed, and start by saying that we are very grateful to have been invited to this very lively discussion surrounding the irrigation development and agricultural water management in Africa. It is true, some would say the backbone of our economies is based on agriculture. But I think in my own view, this is an area that we have not been doing very well in terms of investing much in irrigation.
Fred, can you put off your video, please? Can you put off the video?
Yes, I can. Coming back to my region, because I was given 3 minutes, I can easily say that irrigation is a very important vehicle for promoting increased productivity in our region, provided this rider investments are properly targeted in the irrigation subsector. I'm saying this in terms of observing the financing, the sector itself from a number of member states, which is not given its due attention. In the IGAD region, we have irrigation potential within the region, and there are a number of countries where we have a number of large-scale irrigation schemes, as well as small-scale irrigation schemes, as we saw in the presentations. Irrigation in the Horn of Africa or the IGAD region has not been developed to the same extent as it is in the other regions. And this is an area that I think, in my own view, is something that we need to work on if we have to be a food secure region. In terms of irrigation development and the management in the region, water is scarce in this region, hence less available water per unit area. And I think this again is an area where altogether we need to work together to ensure that water is available. The extent of irrigated area within the region, as may be expected, varies from country to country. But in this region, we have countries with significant irrigation potential. And I've got in mind a country like Ethiopia. From the literature, I've seen irrigated agriculture has a minor place in the economies of our countries in the region, with an exception of Sudan, which has really invested in irrigated agriculture. And I was very happy to see a farm on sugar being quoted in this webinar. Dear participants, for effective irrigation management, water use efficiency is very key, and I was happy to see it being mentioned also in these discussions. And therefore, water management is an important factor in proper irrigation water management. Of course, here we would like to see or to know how much water is available for use for irrigation. And therefore, expanded irrigation development and improved water management are both key areas for increased productivity and water scarcity in conditions in a region like ours. I was told to mention a few challenges, but they were very self-explanatory in these presentations. And in my view, they are very common for most of the regions in Africa. And one of them is water scarcity. Being a water expert, I know we can easily go around this water scarcity issue. And I'm very happy that a number of countries within the region are taking water resources infrastructure development seriously, because this in itself will also avail water for irrigation and other purposes. The other challenge, and I could see it also here, is the challenge of costs involved in irrigation development. Some countries are not really very rich, but I think this is something can easily be looked into even from the AUC to ensure countries will not suffer without food because of a lack of irrigation schemes. Inadequate investment in irrigation development, I think, is another thing, which also is a challenge within our region. I had mentioned of infrastructure development in water, but what I can see is that I reviewed the literature indicating the number of dams being done in all the RECs, in all regional economic communities. And I could see the IGAD region lagging behind, meaning that this is an area again where we need to put a lot of efforts in dam construction to ensure there is water availability for irrigation and all other purposes. I would like to urge all of us from where we see to give considerable attention to water infrastructure development in order to ensure that you have got enough water for irrigation and even livestock development in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. Thank you. I apologize for the short time we were given. You agree with me that we have a lot of speakers and we have been on this for over 2 hours, 30 minutes. In fact, we have exhausted the time actually allocated. Thanks for that. Yes, it is good to hear from IGAD. Next on the charter is Madam Fauzia Shakri from the Maghreb Union. Madam Fauzia, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. En fait, tout d'abord, je voulais rendre hommage à la Commission de l'Union africaine en la personne de son Excellence la commissaire Madame Josepha Sako, ainsi qu'à tous les organisations régionales, continentales et internationales œuvrant pour une gestion rationnelle des ressources naturelles et particulièrement la ressource en eau, élément nécessaire et indispensable à la garantie d'un développement durable de notre région pour les efforts qu'il déploie et qu'il ne cesse de déployer dans ce cadre. Et je voulais aussi saisir cette occasion pour remercier les organisateurs de cette rencontre pour l'invitation qui nous a permis ainsi de faire part de ce débat et d'échanger avec les autres CER, chose qui est très importante à mon avis. Au fait, la question de l'eau et de l'irrigation a toujours été au centre d'intérêt des 5 pays membres de l'Union Maghreb arabe et a reçu une grande attention de la part des gouvernements de ces pays, et ce, en raison de leur rôle effectif dans le développement du secteur agricole et la réalisation de la sécurité alimentaire dans la région du Maghreb. L'agriculture irriguée s'est imposée comme composante des économies nationales et régionales en tant que levier de développement économique et social à travers la production de richesses et la création d'emplois dans les pays du Maghreb. En effet, l'agriculture irriguée a connu un très grand essor dans les pays de la région. Néanmoins, la fragilité de la région Maghreb eu regard à la ressource en eau et l'importance de cette dernière dans toute politique de développement agricole durable nous impose l'élaboration de la mise en œuvre d'une stratégie et des actions multiformes capables de garantir le développement agricole durable et d'assurer la préservation de cette ressource et ne pas hypothéquer l'avenir de nos générations futures. Dans la région du Maghreb arabe, en outre, les ressources en eau mobilisables s'élèvent à 46 milliards de mètres cubes, dont 50% sont considérés comme exploitables. 65% de ces ressources proviennent des eaux de ruissellement menacées par les sécheresses chroniques connues ces 2 dernières décennies. À cela, il y a lieu d'ajouter la forte demande en eau pour assurer un développement durable de la région dans le secteur agricole qui utilise à lui seul presque 80% des ressources en eau disponibles. Face à cette situation, les politiques et les stratégies adoptées et mises en œuvre par les pays de l'UMA traduisent une réelle prise de conscience de la fragilité de la région eu regard à la ressource en eau et sa sensibilité au changement climatique. Ainsi, les mesures prises pour assurer ces besoins en eau et garantir un développement socio-économique durable se sont concrétisées au niveau national par la construction des grands et petits barrages, le recours à l'utilisation des ressources en eau non conventionnelles, dessalement de l'eau de mer, déminéralisation des eaux saumates, réutilisation des eaux usées, UPR. L'incitation à l'économie de l'eau à travers la reconversion de l'irrigation localisée, la conversion à l'irrigation localisée dans le secteur de l'agriculture et l'amélioration des rendements des réseaux pour l'eau potable et le tourisme et l'industrie. La préservation des ressources en eau via les recharges artificielles des nappes, la limitation des pompages des nappes, la gestion participative de l'exploitation des nappes et la lutte contre la pollution. La protection des bassins versants contre l'érosion, la lutte contre les phénomènes extrêmes et tout particulièrement les inondations et la sécheresse. Donc tous, c'est des actions qui ont été menées par les pays au niveau national pour soulever ces défis. À l'échelle régionale et en vue de soulever ces défis, l'UMA, depuis sa création, s'est doté d'instruments institutionnels, stratégiques et opérationnels favorisant une action commune pour la promotion du secteur agricole et la garantie de la sécurité alimentaire dans ces pays membres, tels que, sur le plan stratégique, la Charte maghrébine pour la protection de l'environnement et le développement durable, adoptée en 1992 par le Conseil de la Présidence, et la version stratégique agricole 2030 qui tout accorde une importance capitale à l'eau. Et sur le plan institutionnel, la commission ministérielle maghrébine chargée de la sécurité alimentaire, un conseil ministériel maghrébin chargé des ressources en eau et de l'irrigation, et récemment un conseil maghrébin chargé de l'environnement et du développement durable. Outre les différents groupes et comités de travail maghrébins, notamment le groupe de travail chargé de la rationalisation des eaux d'irrigation. La réflexion menée par ce groupe-là, ce groupe maghrébin chargé de la rationalisation des eaux d'irrigation, et ce depuis le début de son mandat, était focalisée sur la préparation et sur les stratégies adaptées dans le domaine de la rationalisation de l'eau en agriculture et la préparation de dossiers complets sur l'état du secteur de l'irrigation agricole au Maghreb, ainsi que les moyens d'élargir et de gérer les superficies irriguées dans les pays du Maghreb en tenant compte de la rareté qui caractérise la région dans le domaine de l'eau. Les principales recommandations de ce groupe-là se sont articulées autour du développement d'une vision maghrébine commune dans ce cadre, notamment à travers l'harmonisation des stratégies nationales adaptées dans le domaine de l'économie de l'eau d'irrigation et la création d'un centre maghrébin chargé de suivre et d'étudier les questions liées à la rationalisation et à l'exploitation de l'eau en agriculture et la définition d'une stratégie de gestion coordonnée de ressources en eau. Ces orientations se sont traduites au niveau régional par la mise en œuvre dans le cadre de coopération avec un certain nombre de nos partenaires, d'un certain nombre de projets, par exemple, et pour ne citer que les plus récents, le projet sur la coopération régionale dans le domaine de la gestion durable dans le domaine de l'eau, dans les pays de l'Union des Maghreb arabes, qui est un projet de coopération avec la JSZ et l'OSS, et dont la première phase s'est achevée l'année dernière, et la deuxième est en cours d'élaboration. Il y a aussi le projet sur la mobilisation. Oh non. Il y a aussi
Madam Fazia. Hello, Madam Fazia. Sorry, we are running behind time. Sorry, can you round up, please?
Ok. J'ai presque terminé. Donc, il y a le projet sur la mobilisation de potentiel des eaux usées, traitées et des eaux de drainage pour le développement agricole en Afrique du Nord, qui est en cours de mise en œuvre dans le cadre de la coopération de la FAO. Et nous avons aussi lancé une étude d'analyse de l'impact de la sécheresse sur la productivité de l'eau avec l'aide de la FAO. Donc, ce sont des actions que nous avons menées dans le cadre dans ce cadre-là, c'est-à-dire de rationalisation de l'eau dans l'irrigation, dans l'agriculture. Donc, je crois que je vais m'arrêter là et merci. Je m'excuse si j'étais lent.
Thank you very much, Fawzia. Thank you for that submission from the Maghreb Union. Also, let me apologize for the short time you had to make your intervention. We actually expecting Dr. Alan Traore from ECOWAS. I don't know if he's around. We have not been able to locate him. We also expected Dr. Njem Baptiste from the EAC and also Mr. Al-Bakar Mohammed from ECAS, but I've not seen them on the chart. So I think we can move to the next item, which is to wrap up this webinar. It is an Herculean task for me to wrap up this webinar. We have had a very inspiring opening. We had a good presentation, very erudite in presentations and straight to the point. They have addressed the issues that we had set out to discuss, and these had further add value to the framework. We'll be continuing this conversation hereafter, and at the appropriate time, we'll also call on our distinguished panelists and also our esteemed participants to also join with us as we take the issue of agricultural intensification in the continent as we advance it forward. Let me thank all the participants. Let me thank the organizers. I will hand over to Dr. Ahmed Elmekas to close the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mori, for this good moderation for the regional economic communities. And I have to join you to thank my sister, Madame Fawzia, and my brother, Dr. Fred, for their participation. Actually, distinguished participants, my family member in irrigation sector. All of us know that water is a critical input for agricultural production and plays an important role in food and nutrition security. Due to the population growth and the climate change, competition for water resources is expected to increase, with a particular impact on agriculture. Population is expected to increase in Africa to over 2.5 billion by 2050. And this population will need food and fiber to meet its basic needs. Colleagues, as mentioned in the webinar, the ability to improve water management in agriculture is facing challenges of inadequate policies and financing limitations and the lack of enabling environment and the necessary institutional capacities to effectively carry out their functions. Although there is not single silver bullet solution, through collective action, we can create and find innovative and inclusive ways to support member state and regional economic communities. To support them in policies, financing, and scaling solutions to support the different pathways discussed here today. This is not the end of the journey. This is not the end of the journey, but only the start. All what I have mentioned should encourage all of us, starting from community level, member state level, regional economic communities, African Union, and development partners, to put our hands together along this journey to advance the area of irrigation development and water management in Africa. This will facilitate our families, those who are working on farm under the sun, infected by malaria, suffering from food and nutrition insecurity, meanwhile providing us with healthy food. Colleagues, my family member in irrigation sector, all of you will receive a link to the event recording along with other event resources. You will also receive a short survey, and we will greatly appreciate your response so we can continue to improve our programming. for our families in Africa. We will continue to focus on this important topic in future events and invite you to keep the conversation alive on your own social media platforms using the hashtag IDWM framework. Dear colleagues, to conclude, allow me to thank the speakers and the representative of regional economic communities for their excellent presentations and remarks. I'd like also to thank all of you for your questions and comments that have been raised, which is showing that the area of irrigation development and water management has common interest in our beloved continent. Colleagues, distinguished participants, allow me on behalf of all of you to thank the organizations that have co-organized this event with us. And we have to say in one voice, Vive l'Afrique, Vive l'Afrique, Vive l'Afrique, je vous remercie. Thank you all, obrigado, shukran, and have a good day. Thank you.